Generations of women, my mother, your mother, and their mothers, have told each other stories and woven narratives about how to be a woman, how to be a woman in order to avoid isolation, be respectable and acceptable. Yet, so many of these stories and beliefs completely failed us as young girls and women at so many different levels. It has isolated many of us as young girls in our own minds and bodies, and sometimes pushed us to put our desires in the back burner to always keep the world around us happy. Now, I want you to tell your mothers and fathers, your aunties and uncles, that it's time they give us the real stories. They tell us what did not work for them. They expose the flaws in the happy ending. And they tell us what they could have done to be a happier and fuller version of themselves, and what they would have liked to hear from their mothers. These are the stories that, as daughters, we must demand from our mothers. I wish I had asked these questions to my mother. Maybe I did. And sometimes, probably most of the times, I got the standard answers. So I wish I had asked my mother one more time. And I want you to ask your mothers. Ask them to tell you stories of independence, stories where marriage is not a milestone, your financial independence is. Ask them to celebrate your achievements, not only when you're a little girl in kindergarten, but as you grow older and pursue your ambitions fearlessly. Ask them to teach you how to cook, how to clean, how to be organized. You need to learn all these life skills, not because you will do better in your in-laws' home, but because it's good to have these skills up your sleeve when you take that plunge towards independence. Ask them to stop telling you stories about how to be different people in different situations to avoid stigma and the devastating impact of stigma that has on our lives. Motherhood gives you purpose in life, they tell you. So ask them and question them as to, when has motherhood ever defined any woman? Isn't it her vision of who she wants to be that can give her a definitive purpose in her life? You don't need motherly instincts. And all women and all girls don't have motherly instincts, and that's okay. Ask them to tell you stories of women who are not mothers, who chose not to be mothers. You just have to be human, and the rest will fall in place. Ask them to tell you stories of rebellion. Every time they ask you to accommodate and adjust because you are a girl, remind them about autonomy and agency. Tell them that you have the right to choose what is right for you. Ask them to tell you stories of rage, of rebellion, to tell you stories when women and girls stood up and raised their voice when other women and girls were discriminated against. Ask them to tell you stories of rejecting pain. Let them tell you that pain is not a natural biological burden that a woman has to bear. There is no joy in pain. We as girls and women have the right to reject pain, and we can embrace things that give us pleasure, bodily pleasure, and otherwise. Ask them to tell you stories of power and persistence. Because if there's one trip you want to avoid, that's the guilt trip of not being the ideal. You don't have to be ideal. An ideal daughter, an ideal mother, an ideal wife. You don't have to be any of it. The notion of ideal itself can be isolating for thousands of us. So ask them to take you on a trip where they teach you to be authentic, an authentic self of who you are. Ask them to tell you stories of forming a loving relationship with your own body, your skin color, your hair, your height, your weight. Your body is something that you need to nurture, not to meet an end goal of having babies. Ask them to tell you that your body is for you to cherish and take care of and experience the pleasure. Ask them to tell you about choices and consequences. And every time they ask you, what will the world say? Tell them to forget about the world and ask them, what do you think about my choices? Remind them that you can be assertive, yet compassionate. You can be aggressive and gentle. And always remember that if they dismiss you or are threatened by your presence in the room, you know that you're doing well. And to all the aunties and uncles who are moral policing at every nook and corner to see how our young girls are moving to ensure that they stay in line, tell them, let me love infinitely. Let me seek pleasure guilt-free. And let me work towards achieving what I think I need to have in order to be the best version of myself. In the words of Govind Ranade, a freedom fighter in India, let my conscience and my reasoning be the sole guide to my conduct. Let me, my dear mother, rise to the dignity of self-control. Tell them the stories of independence and tell them the stories that they can tell their daughters and sons.